Henry James, The Turn of the Screw. We huddled close about the fire, breathless and intent, as the tale was told. The story was gruesome, as proper for a Christmas Eve in an old house, but no one uttered a word until someone remarked on hearing for the first time of a ghost appearing to a child. The specter, incidentally, had manifested in an ancient country house much like our own. A little boy, sleeping in the room with his mother, had beheld a dreadful apparition and wakened her, not for comfort, but so that she might see the cause of his terror. It was these words, later, towards midnight, that drew a remark from Douglas, which led to a curious consequence. Someone told another story, not particularly gripping, but Douglas, it seemed, wasn't listening. I perceived he was eager to relate something himself, and we could only wait. The wait was to last but 2 days, yet even that evening, before we retired, he partly unveiled the mystery. "Whatever the specter of Mr. Griffin may have been," he said, "I grant you its appearance to so tender a being is strange. But it is not the first instance of a child figuring in such a tale. If the presence of a child gives the effect another turn of the screw, what do you say to 2 children? Why, of course," someone exclaimed, "it gives the screw 2 turns, and we are most eager to hear it." I recalled Douglas clearly by the fire, his back to the hearth, his hands in his pockets, looking down at us all. No one knows the story but myself. It is too horrible. Naturally, several voices at once declare that this was precisely its value. Our friend, quietly savoring his impending triumph, looked over the group and went on. "It is beyond everything. Nothing I know touches it. For sheer terror?" I remember asking. He seemed to find it difficult to describe. He passed his hand over his eyes with a slight grimace. "For dreadfulness. Oh, how delicious!" cried one of the ladies. He took no notice of her. He looked at me as if he saw me, yet saw something beyond me, too. For general uncanny ugliness and horror and pain. "Well then," I said, "just sit right down and begin." He turned round to the fire again, gave it a kick with his foot, and contemplated the blaze for a moment. Then he looked back at us. "I can't begin. I shall have to send to town." There was a unanimous groan at this, but Douglas, absorbed in his idea, explained. "It's written. It's in a locked drawer. It has not been out for years. I could write to my man, enclose the key. He'd send down the packet." His words were addressed, it seemed to me personally, as if seeking support in his hesitation. He was breaking a silence of many winters. He had reasons, clearly, for his long reserve. The others deprecated the delay, but I myself was charmed by his scruples. I urged him to write by the first post and to read us the story the very moment it arrived. Then I asked if the experience had been his own. "Oh, thank God, no. But the story is written by you?" "Only my impression is here," he said, pressing his hand to his heart. "I've never lost it." "Then your manuscript is an old, faded ink, in the most beautiful hand." He paused again. "A woman's hand. She has been dead these 20 years. She sent me the pages before she died." We were all silent now, listening intently, and, of course, there was someone ready with a jest. Douglas took the suggestion without a smile, but also without irritation. "She was a most charming person, but she was 10 years older than I. She was my sister's governess," he said quietly. "She was the most agreeable woman I've ever known in her position. She would have been worthy of any whatever. It was long ago, and this episode was long before. I was at Trinity, and I found her at home on my coming down the second summer. I had a delightful 6 weeks. I hardly went away, and we used to talk in her leisure moments in the garden. I was taken with her extraordinary refinement. Yes, don't grin. I liked her extremely, and am glad to this day to think she liked me too. If she hadn't, she wouldn't have told me. She never told anyone. It wasn't simply that she said so, but that I knew she hadn't. I'm sure you'll see when you hear. Is it because she's so very dreadful? I burst out. He fixed me with a steady look. You'll see for yourself, he repeated. You'll see right through. I didn't look away. I see. She was in love. He smiled for the first time. You were cute. Yes, she had been. That came out. She couldn't tell her story without telling that. I understood, and she saw I did, yet we said nothing. I remember the hour and the place, the corner of the lawn, the shade of the great beeches, the long, hot summer afternoon. Not a breath of fear was in the air, yet he moved away from the hearth and sank back into his chair. Will the packet come, then, on Thursday? I asked. I think not till the second post. Then after dinner, we shall all meet again here. His glance circled the company. Does no one leave? His tone held a note of hope. We're all staying. I'm staying. And I, cried the ladies who had been about to depart. Mrs. Griffin, however, desired a detail. Whom did she fall in love with? You'll see from the story, I hurriedly replied. But I can't wait. The story won't tell, said Douglas, not in any literal, vulgar way. More's the pity, then. That's the only way I ever understand. Won't you tell us, Douglas? Somebody else inquired. He got up from his chair. Tomorrow. Now I must go to bed. Good night. And, picking up a candlestick, he quickly left us in a state of mild bewilderment. From our corner in the great dark hall, we heard his step on the stair. Then Mrs. Griffin spoke. Well, if I don't know who she was in love with, I know who he was. She was 10 years older, said her husband. Raison de plus, at that age. How touching that he should have treasured it all these years. 40 years, Griffin put in, and to bring it out now with such a flare. That flare will give us a splendid evening on Thursday, I said, to which everyone agreed. Until Thursday, our thoughts were filled with little else. Someone told a rather pointless story, like the first chapter of a serial, and then, wishing each other good night, we took our candles and dispersed to our rooms. In the morning I learned that the letter containing the key had already been sent to Douglas's London apartments with the first post. Yet, perhaps because of this very news, or perhaps in spite of it, we left Douglas in peace until evening, until that hour which best suited the thrill of anticipation that now united us. And when he spoke, he did so with a willingness more perfect than we could have wished, and even explained the reason why. Gathered once more about the hall fire, we listened to him in a state of agreeable tension. It appeared that the tale he had promised to read did indeed require a brief prologue. To be done with the matter at once, I may as well say that the narrative which follows is a faithful copy, made by me many years later, of the original manuscript. Poor Douglas, already aware his end was near, had entrusted it to me. He had received it by post on the third day, and had begun reading to our hushed little circle on the fourth evening, in the same hall, to immense success. The ladies who had said they would stay, after all departed, as they had originally planned, protesting they were dying of curiosity from the hints he had already dropped. But our reduced party became only the more intimate and select, bound together by a shared tremor before the fire. We learned first that the written narrative took up the oral tale at a point that might be considered the very beginning of the affair. The main thing was this. Douglas's friend, the youngest daughter of a poor country parson, and at the age of 20, had, in a fit of trepidation, traveled to London to answer in person an advertisement to which she had already replied by letter. For a final interview, she presented herself at a grand house in Harley Street, where she encountered her prospective employer. He was a gentleman in the prime of life, a bachelor, and a man of fashion, such a figure as the flustered country girl might have dreamed of or met in the pages of an old novel. The type is easily imagined. Thank heaven, is not extinct. The gentleman was handsome, confident, charming, and benevolent. His gallantry and magnificence overwhelmed her, but what most emboldened and encouraged her was his presenting the whole matter as a favor she would be conferring upon him, which he would receive with gratitude. She saw that he was rich, but extravagant. She saw him in all the glory of his good looks, his worldly ease, his expensive habits, his charming manners. His townhouse was filled with souvenirs and trophies of the chase, but he wished her to proceed at once to his country house, an old family seat in Essex. After their parents died in India, he had been left as guardian to his two small nephews, the children of a younger, military brother, whom he had also lost. The two children had thus become a charge on the hands of a man of his worldly position, a bachelor without experience or patience. He had done his best, but was clearly at his wit's end, and had, doubtless, committed blunders. He was full of good intentions, however, and had acted, in the children's interest, to the best of his understanding. The great thing was that he had placed them in the country, as children, of course, should be in the country, had settled them at his house of Bly, a healthy, sequestered spot, and had put in charge the best people he could find, even sacrificing some of his own servants, visiting them when he could. The difficulty was that they had no other relations, and that his own affairs took up all his time. He had put them in possession of Bly, which was healthy and secure, and had placed at the head of their little establishment, confined to the lower floors, a Mrs. Grose, a most respectable woman, whom he was sure his visitor would like, who had formerly been maid to his mother and was now the housekeeper. She was temporarily in charge of the little girl, Flora, and had no children of her own, a tremendous recommendation. There were plenty of people to help, but of course the young lady who should go down as governess would be in supreme authority. She would also have, in holidays, to look after the small boy, Miles, who had been sent for the term to school, young as he was, but what else could be done, and would soon be home for the holidays. There had been for the two children originally a young lady whom they had unfortunately lost. She had done for them quite beautifully till her death. The person in question was most respectable, so much so that after this sad event there was nothing for Miles but a school. Since then Mrs. Grose had been doing her best for Flora, for manners and all. There was also a cook, a housemaid, a dairy woman, an old pony, an old groom, and an old gardener, all likewise very respectable. At this point in Douglas's narration, someone asked, "And what did the former governess die of?" "Of too much respectability?" Our friend's reply was prompt. "You'll see in good time. I don't anticipate." "Excuse me, I thought that was just what you were doing." "In her place," I suggested, "I should have wished to learn if the office were full of deadly peril." Douglas completed my thought. She did wish to learn, and she did learn. You shall hear tomorrow what she learnt. Meanwhile, of course, the prospect struck her as grim. She was young, untried, nervous. It was a vision of serious duties and little company, of really great loneliness. She hesitated, took a couple of days to consider. But the salary offered greatly exceeded her modest measure, and on a second interview she faced the music. Here Douglas paused, and for the benefit of the company I put in, the moral of which was, of course, the seduction exercised by the splendid young man. She succumbed to it. He got up and, as before, went to the fire, gave a stir to a log with his foot, and stood a moment with his back to us. She saw him only twice. But that's just the beauty of her passion. To my surprise, Douglas turned round to me. It is the beauty of it. There were others, you see, who didn't. He went on. His lordship laid the case frankly before her. For some applicants, the terms had proved prohibitive. They were frankly frightened. They found the whole thing too strange, too ambiguous. The main condition in particular, which was that she should never, under any circumstances, trouble him, but never, neither appeal, nor complain, nor write about anything. Only meet all questions herself, receive all moneys from a solicitor, take the whole thing over, and let him alone. She promised to do this, and she mentioned to me that when, for a moment, delighted, he held her hand, thanking her for the sacrifice, she already felt rewarded. Was that the only reward? One of the ladies asked. She never saw him again. Oh, said the lady, which, as our friend immediately left us again, was the only other word of relevance contributed to the subject till, the next night, by the corner of the hearth in the best chair, he opened the faded red cover of a thin, old-fashioned, gilt-edged album. The reading occupied several evenings, and on the first of them, the same lady put another question. What is the title? It has no title. Oh, I have, I said. But Douglas, without heeding me, had already begun to read with a fine clearness that was like a rendering of the author's fine, clear hand. I remember the beginning of this story as a series of flights and drops, a seesawing of the mood that carried me from confidence to doubt. In London, having given my pledge, I passed 2 days of heavy anxiety, at times sinking into dread, at others convincing myself I had made a mistake. In this same state, I endured the long, jolting journey by coach to the station, where a carriage from the house was to meet me. The vehicle had been sent in advance, I was told, and in the late June afternoon I beheld it, roomy and waiting. Then, as we drove through the summer twilight, through a country where everything seemed to greet me with a richness of beauty, my spirit lifted, and when we turned in at the avenue, I drew a long breath of relief. Clear proof, I suppose, of how tense I had been before. I had expected something dreary, I had feared something grim, and what I found was a delightful surprise. I recall as a most pleasant impression the broad, clear front, its open windows, its fresh curtains, and the pair of maids looking out. I remember the lawn and the bright flowers, the crunch of our wheels on the gravel, the clustered treetops over which the rooks circled and cawed in the golden sky. The scene had a grandeur that was a world away from the modest parsonage of my home, and in the next moment the substantial person presented herself, holding a little girl by the hand, and dropped me the deepest curtsy, as if I were the mistress of the house or a distinguished visitor. I had taken in nothing so splendid on Harley Street, and here, I remember, the master of Bly grew larger still. I thought to myself, my future will surpass every promise. My gloom had left me that day, for the next hours were filled with the acquaintance of my younger pupil. The little girl who accompanied Mrs. Grose at first appeared to me such a charming creature that to teach her would be pure happiness. I had never seen a child more beautiful, and I wondered afterwards why my employer had not told me more about her. I slept little that night. I was too excited. This joyful restlessness surprised me, and, as I recall, it never fully left me, heightening the impression of the generous welcome I had received. The large, impressive room, one of the best in the house. The great canopied bed, the figured draperies, the tall mirrors in which I saw myself from head to foot for the first time, all astonished me, as did the extraordinary charm of my little pupil, and indeed everything I encountered. From the very first, my mind was occupied with the thought of my relations with Mrs. Grose, a thought that had, I fear, troubled me even on the journey. The only thing that might have given me pause in the first hours was the excessive, even touching delight she showed at my arrival. I noticed it within the first half hour. She, a stout, plain, wholesome, clean woman, was so happy she had to hold herself back. It puzzled me then. Why should she hide such feelings? And coupled with reflection and suspicion, it could, of course, cause unease. But I was comforted by the thought that nothing alarming could come from such an embodiment of happiness as the radiant person of my little girl. Her angelic beauty was perhaps the very thing that caused the unease which made me rise several times in the night to pace my room, contemplating the picture of the present and the future, to peer from the open window at the faint streaks of dawn, to examine the visible parts of the house, and, as the shadows dispersed and the birds began to twitter, to listen for a sound less natural than these, a sound I fancied I heard not from without, but from within. There was a moment when I thought I caught the distant cry of a child, and another when I started awake at the light tread of footsteps in the corridor outside my door. But these were fleeting fancies, which I dismissed at once, and only in the darkness of subsequent events did they return to memory with fresh force. The care of little Flora, her instruction and upbringing, could clearly fill my life with happiness and purpose. It had been arranged that after this first night she should sleep in my room, and her little white bed had already been moved there. All responsibility for Flora was to be mine, and only for this last night she remained with Mrs. Grose, out of consideration for the child's natural shyness with a stranger, and with a regard for that shyness itself. And though the shyness was there, she confessed to it directly and bravely, without embarrassment, with a deep and gentle candor, like an infant from a Raphael painting, leaving us to judge her and decide for her, and I foresaw that she would soon love me. Thus, I too quickly grew to trust Mrs. Grose herself. I saw how it delighted her that I was enraptured with my pupil as we sat at dinner by the light of 4 tall candles, with Flora, in her bib, upon her high chair, casting merry little glances at me over the rim of her milk cup. Naturally, many things could only be hinted at in her presence, exchanged in looks of shared wonder and delight. And the little boy, does he resemble her? Is he too so remarkable? One does not flatter a child. Oh, miss, he's even more remarkable. She paused, plate in hand, beaming a smile toward our little companion, who looked from her to me. If you think well of this one, well, what then? Why, you'll be just in love with our little gentleman. I suppose that is what I came for. I'm easily charmed. In London, I was charmed too. I remember still how broadly Mrs. Grose's face expanded when she grasped my meaning. On Harley Street? Yes, there. Well, miss, you're not the first, and you won't be the last. Oh, I don't claim any distinction. I even smiled. At any rate, my other pupil arrives, I understand, tomorrow. Not tomorrow, Friday, Mississippi. He comes by the coach, as you did, under the care of the guard, and is met by the same carriage. I hasten to say it would be far more proper and friendly if I myself should go to meet the coach with his little sister. Mrs. Grose assented so heartily that I saw in it a reassuring pledge. Thank goodness, she would remain loyal to me, that we should always be in accord. Oh, how she did rejoice in my coming. The next day, I think, there was simply a reaction in me from the first flush of enthusiasm, a slight oppression from the fuller sense of the scale of my new duties and my surroundings, which I now inspected and sized up. To such dimensions I was unaccustomed, though I met them with spirit, both frightened and proud. Lessons, of course, were deferred due to all the excitement. I decided my first task was to win the child by gentleness, to let her get used to me. I spent the whole day out of doors with the little girl, and to her delight, promised that no one but herself should show me the estate. She led me step by step, room by room, revealing secrets, chattering in a childishly amusing and charming way, and within half an hour we were intimate friends. Young though she was, I was struck by the confidence and boldness with which she led me through the empty rooms and dim corridors, up puzzling staircases where I involuntarily paused, even to the top of an old machicolated tower where my head swam. She prattled of morning music lessons, telling more than she asked, and her lively little voice rang in the air, drawing me onward. I have never seen Bly since I left it, and I dare say it would appear to me now, with a mature eye, rather smaller. But then, as the golden hair and blue dress of my little guide flashed around the sharp corners and her small feet pattered along the passages, it seemed to me a magical, romantic castle inhabited by a bright sprite. All its colors seemed drawn from fairy tales and legends. Had I dozed off over a book of fairy tales? No, it was simply a large old house, ugly but comfortable, preserving features of a remoter building, half rebuilt, where we, it seemed to me, were almost lost, like a handful of passengers on a great drifting ship. And the strangest thing of all, I was at the helm. Everything was clarified for me 2 days later when I went with Flora to meet our little gentleman, as Mrs. Grose called him, and even more distinctly, by an incident that deeply agitated me on the second evening after my arrival. The first day, as I said, had brought on the whole a sense of relief, but it ended with an ominous portent. That evening, the post bag, brought in late, contained a letter for me from my employer's hand. It held a few lines and enclosed another letter, addressed to him, with its seal unbroken. This, I believe, is from the headmaster, and must be tedious. Read it, please, and deal with it. But don't write to me, I'm off. I broke the seal with effort, hesitating a long while, finally carrying the unopened missive to my room and taking it up only at bedtime. I should have left it till morning. It cost me a second sleepless night. The next day I was in despair, not knowing whom to consult, and at last resolved to confide in Mrs. Grose, if no one else. What does it mean? The boy is dismissed from school. She gave me a look that instantly imprinted itself on my memory. Then, as if catching herself, tried to avert her eyes. But aren't they all sent home? For the holidays, yes. But Miles is asked not to return at all. Under my intent gaze, she flushed perceptibly. They won't take him back. They positively decline. She stood with her face turned away, but suddenly lifted her eyes, and I saw they were full of tears. What has he done? I hesitated at first, then decided it was best simply to hand her the letter. But she, without taking it, clasped her hands behind her back. She shook her head sadly. Such things aren't for me to read, Mrs. Sippy. My confidant cannot read. I was embarrassed, tried to soften my blunder, and unfolded the letter to read it to her, but, losing courage, folded it again and put it in my pocket. Is he really so bad? The tears were still in her eyes. Is that what these gentlemen write? They don't go into particulars. They merely express regret that they cannot keep him at the school. It can mean only one thing. Mrs. Grose listened in mute agitation. She dared not ask what exactly, and so, after a brief silence, I went on, if only to clarify the matter to myself in her presence, that he is a corrupting influence on the other children. At this she flushed all over, with that swiftness characteristic of simple folk. Miles, he corrupts? Such a wave of trust swept over me that, though I had not yet seen the child, my fears seemed utter absurdity. To make her understand me better, to draw closer to her, I replied with sarcastic emphasis. His little companions, those poor innocent babes. What a horror, cried Mrs. Grose. How can they say such cruel things? He's not yet 10. Yes. It's simply inconceivable. She was visibly cheered by this judgment. You must see him first, Mississippi, and then you'll believe. I felt a passionate desire to see him that very instant. Thus began a curiosity that in the coming hours was to grow into tormenting impatience. Mrs. Grose, as far as I could judge, understood the impression she had made and was firmly guiding me toward her goal. Or would you believe the same about my little lady? Look at her, for heaven's sake. I turned and saw Flora, whom I had left 10 minutes before in the schoolroom with a clean sheet of paper, a pencil, and a copybook of roundos. Now she stood in the open doorway, expressing in her own childish way a complete detachment from tiresome lessons, but gazing at me with that clear look which said, "It is only her dawning attachment to my person that makes her follow at my heels." I needed nothing more to feel the full force of Mrs. Grose's comparison, and, clasping my pupil in my arms, I covered her little face with kisses in which there was an echo of sobs, as if to atone for my guilt. Yet for the rest of the day, I sought an opportunity to speak with my friend, especially because by evening I began to feel she was avoiding me. I remember catching her on the stairs. We descended together, and at the foot I stopped her, laying a hand on her shoulder. What you told me today at noon, I shall take as a declaration that you never knew anything bad of the boy. Mrs. Grose threw back her head. This time she was clearly and deliberately playing a part. That I never knew nothing of the sort. No, I can't swear to that. I grew agitated again. Then you did know? Yes, miss. Thank the Lord. After a moment's thought, I agreed with her. You mean that if a boy never... Then he's not a boy to my mind. I held her tighter. You prefer them with a tendency to mischief. And to keep pace, I added quickly, so do I, but not to the point of corrupting others. Corrupting? My loud word didn't quite reach her. I explained. To spoil. She looked at me hard, trying to understand, but my words provoked in her an inappropriate, incomprehensible laugh. Are you afraid he might spoil you too? She asked this with such wonderful, frank humor that I laughed too, not very wisely, and for the moment drew back, afraid of appearing ridiculous. But the next day, before the carriage was brought round, I tried to learn about another matter. And what was the lady like who was here before me? The last governess? She was young and pretty too, almost like you, Mississippi. Ah, then I hope her youth and beauty helped her. I exclaimed involuntarily. It seems he likes us young and pretty. Oh, indeed he did, Mrs. Grose confirmed. That's what he liked them all for. But, having said it, she immediately caught herself. I mean to say, miss, it was his lordship's way. I was startled. But whom were you speaking of first? Her face showed nothing, but she blushed. Why of him? Of his lordship? Who else could it be? There could be nothing else. And the impression that she had slipped past. I only asked what I wished to know. And did she notice anything about the boy? Anything bad? She never told me anything. I felt a twinge of guilt, but overcame it. Was she caring attentive? Mrs. Grose reflected, as if wishing to answer conscientiously. In some ways, yes, but not in all. She thought again. What can I say, miss? She's gone. I won't speak ill. I understand. I hastened to reply, but after a moment decided to press on despite this reservation. And did she die here? No, she went away. Something in the brevity of her answers struck me as ambiguous. Went away to die? Mrs. Grose looked out the window, but I felt I had a right to know what conduct was expected of a young lady at Bly. Do you mean she fell ill and went home? She wasn't ill in our house. Nothing of the sort was noticed. She went home at the end of the year for a short holiday. So she said herself, and surely she had a right after so much service. We had a young woman here then, a nursemaid who had stayed on, a good, clever girl, and we put her in charge of the children for the time. But our miss never came back, and just when we expected her, I heard from his lordship that she was dead. I pondered her words. But of what? He didn't tell me. Please, miss, I must get to my work. Ladies and gentlemen, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part of this work. The full version of Henry James's The Turn of the Screw will be published here. Share your impressions and thoughts in the comments. I will be delighted to chat with you.